Welcome to the Explainer. Let's just jump right in because today we're taking a deep dive into a tiny, almost invisible piece of geography that carries absolute global weight. We are looking at a strip of land that has literally triggered massive tank battles, sparked international crises, and commanded the attention of global superpowers for decades. How can a tiny 170 square kilometer patch of dirt dictate the fate of over a billion people? It's a wild thought, isn't it? We usually think of geopolitics in terms of huge continents or sprawling capital cities. But honestly, some of the world's most volatile conflicts hinge on microscopic geographical anomalies. And there is absolutely no better example of this than the Akhnoor Bulge. Let's take a look at what this actually is. The Akhnoor Bulge is a very narrow, 170 square kilometer strip of Pakistani territory extending right into Indian-administered Jammu and Kashmir. Squeezed incredibly tight between the Chenab and Tawi rivers, this little protrusion is a total geographical nightmare. It acts as a highly sensitive, critical choke point right on the settled international border. Now, what's really fascinating here is how the exact same terrain is viewed by two nuclear-armed neighbors. Pakistan looks at this strip and calls it the Akhnoor Dagger. To them, it's an offensive weapon, literally a blade pointed straight at India's heart. But India? India looks at the exact same patch of dirt and sees the chicken's neck. They see a highly vulnerable arterial choke point where one swift strike could completely sever their vital connections. When you break down the actual distances, you instantly get why this spot is a ticking time bomb. It's under 30 kilometers from Jammu in India and less than 50 kilometers from Sialkot in Pakistan. That is way too close for comfort to major military and population centers. And most importantly, it directly threatens the critical transport link connecting mainland India to the rest of Jammu and Kashmir. Moving on to Section 1. 1965. Operation Grand Slam. To really grasp why this geography is so explosive, we need to look back at the conventional warfare fought right over it. Back in 1965, Pakistan's master plan had one ultimate target: a single, fragile Class 18 bridge over the fast-flowing Chenab River. Now, a Class 18 bridge is a pretty light load-bearing structure, which just highlights how incredibly fragile the infrastructure was back then. Capturing that one bridge was the whole goal. Take the bridge, choke the Indian army, and sever Jammu and Kashmir from India. So, how did this all escalate? Well, Pakistan launched a surprise attack with vastly superior armor, rolling in with American-made Patton tanks. The Indian infantry was stretched thin, and their lighter AMX-13 tanks were completely outgunned. One historian actually compared them to matchboxes going up against the Pattons. Facing a massive artillery disadvantage, Indian forces had to fall back. But here's the strategic twist. India didn't stop this overpowering offensive by winning the local tank battle. Instead, they proactively opened a massive new war front down south in the Lahore sector. This forced Pakistan to completely divert its forces, and the Dagger's thrust stalled out into a ceasefire. Now for Section 2, 1971, Wringing the Neck. Fast forward a few years to the 1971 war. India had learned a really harsh lesson about this geographical vulnerability and decided it was time to eliminate the threat for good. I absolutely love this quote because it hits the nail on the head regarding their new mindset. Indian Lieutenant General Zorawar Chand Bakshi declared, "The chicken's neck should be wrung and broken off." That is a massive shift, right? They went from nervously defending against the Dagger to an aggressive, offensive posture meant to neutralize it entirely. So how exactly do you wring a chicken's neck? While Pakistan focused on an offensive nearby in Chem, the Indian army made some rapid tactical moves. First, to literally shatter the enemy's momentum, they blew up the crucial Mandiala Bridge over the Munawar Tavi. Then, under the cover of night on December 5th and 6th, Indian forces completely outflanked and captured the Akhnoor Dagger. Just like that, they isolated the Pakistani forces and shattered the myth that this dagger was invulnerable. Section 3. Superpowers and Strategic Restraint. Let's zoom out to the global stage for a second. Enter the era of nuclear arsenals, and a fascinating geopolitical theory called the stability-instability paradox. The idea here is that having nuclear weapons actually prevents an all-out total war, which is the stability part, but ironically, it encourages smaller, lower-level asymmetric violence. Why? Because both sides know the other is terrified of triggering a nuclear apocalypse, so they feel they can get away with smaller skirmishes. Because of this looming nuclear shadow, global superpowers have constantly had to step in as mediators to keep this tiny strip of land from sparking World War III. In 1966, Russia actually brokered the Tashkent Accord, making India hand the captured Akhnoor lands back to Pakistan. In 1972, the Simla Agreement reaffirmed those borders, despite India's huge victory. And jump to 2002, following devastating parliament attacks and massive military buildups, the United States had to jump in to pressure President Musharraf to halt cross-border infiltrations before things completely spiraled out of control. But, militaries always adapt. India realized their large army couldn't mobilize fast enough to punish lower-level provocations without risking international intervention. So, they developed the Cold Start Doctrine, using rapid, integrated battle groups from a standing start. And Pakistan's answer to that? The HAF-9. These are nuclear-capable, short-range ballistic missiles designed specifically to obliterate those rapid Indian battle groups. As you can see, the margin of error for catastrophic escalation here is practically zero. That brings us to Section 4, China and multi-front threats. To really visualize the modern nightmare of a multi-front war, take a look at the Siliguri Corridor. This is India's eastern chicken's neck, squeezed between Nepal, Bhutan, and Bangladesh, and facing intense pressure from Chinese territorial claims. Just like the Akhnoor Dagger over on the west, this shows us how incredibly vulnerable these narrow geographical strips are to aggressive neighbors. And what's especially alarming right now is the intelligence pointing to a strategic, united front. This is an initiative reportedly spearheaded by China to create multi-front pressure on India. The goal is to essentially unite disparate terrorist outfits from Jammu and Kashmir with insurgents in the northeast, bringing Maoist rebels and Pakistan-supported groups all under one massive operational umbrella. So, historical borders are now being exploited by a highly coordinated alliance of state and non-state actors. Section 5. Modern transnational security risks. We're moving from an era of tank battles to an era of shadows, which begs the question, how do you even defend against a borderless threat? When the enemy isn't wearing a uniform or driving a tank, the old rules of conventional warfare just don't apply anymore. Because of their unique, constrained geography, narrow strips like the Akhnoor Dagger are turning into perfect asymmetric hubs. Transnational crime groups are heavily exploiting them. They use these transit points for cross-border smuggling of illegal drugs, coordinating weapon drops, and moving banned substances. It is the perfect cover for fugitive networks and borderless terrorists who operate in the gray zones of international law. In fact, the source material explicitly highlights this, stating, quote, "Atypical strips of land are often used as transit points by transnational crime groups for illegal trade." We really need to understand that these areas aren't just traditional military vulnerabilities anymore. They are the epicenters of narco-terrorism and human security threats. The fight here today is just as much about stopping illicit weapon drops and narcotics as it is about stopping foreign armies. So we end up right back where we started, looking at this tiny 170 square kilometer patch of dirt. But the context is completely different now. In an era of cyber warfare, rapid ballistic missiles, and globalized terror syndicates, does holding a physical dagger or a chicken's neck actually guarantee your security? Or does it just invite entirely new forms of chaos? It's a huge question, and military planners are going to have to figure it out fast. Thanks for tuning into this explainer, and I'll catch you in the next one.